Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be taking a look at the writing assessment for functional skills level 1 and level 2. Now within this video we're going to look at an actual exam question and we're going to think about the kind of things that you need to be aware of in order to get a decent pass, but also some of the things to avoid and make sure that we can work on those key areas to make sure we're able to develop and improve our writing. Now if you haven't done so already, please could you like and subscribe. It really does help us out when you do so. If you've got anything that's niggling at you, anything that you're worried about any part of your assessment for functional skills English, then please do leave us a comment and we'll try and get back to you as soon as we can. Okay, so the first thing we're going to think about is there's key different terms that you need to be aware of when you approach the writing assessment. So the first thing to think about would be whether you're asked to write to inform, write to advise, or even writing to persuade. Now these are going to be the three main areas that you need to think about. Now when you're thinking about the different forms of writing, so you've got loads of things like articles, blogs, leaflets and letters, things like that, they're also going to have a different purpose. So why are we writing it? So it's either going to be to inform, so you're giving information, to advise people, or to persuade. Now a good thing to think about is just like that teacher's top tip there in the right hand corner, remember that the tone and mood you use are reflected in the choice of adjectives as well. So if you're thinking about the actual tone of your writing, you've got to think about what kind of words convey the kind of mood you want your writing to have. If we're advising someone, for example, you're going to want to have quite a gentle tone. You're not pushing them, you're not being aggressive with the words, you're not really trying to overly convince them. You're trying to give them your thoughts and your ideas so they can make their own informed decision. When you're writing to inform, this is typically something we do when we're talking about just giving information. So it's very straightforward. And we're going to look at the different types of writing that might require you to do this. Now writing to persuade, this can often be the hardest one, and it's also a really important one because it's something that you'll need to do if you choose to carry on the qualification and go up to level 2 functional skills or even up to GCSE English as well. So we're going to take a look at those three different forms. Okay, so there's very, very important things to know when you're thinking about the writing assessment. Class feedback. Check your understanding against the key details below. So we've got the same three key elements that we were looking at a moment ago. So the first one we're going to think about is writing to inform. Now if you're asked to write to inform, you need to be aware that the purpose of this writing is to supply the reader with relevant information. Typical types of writing that you'd have to include this kind of information on would be things like a leaflet or a review, and it also actually will be on a report as well, so that will be a key one to include as well. And again, a report's a really good one to think about because that's where you're literally just stating the facts. So if you were to write a report about a college or a school that you may be attending, you're going to be very matter of fact, and each paragraph is going to have a certain element that you're going to include in your report. So it will be something like, if you're writing about a college, it will be things like the catering facilities, the classroom sizes, the teachers and the quality of the teaching, and all of those will be different paragraphs. You won't be putting your personal opinion necessarily, you'll just be giving them the information so they can make their own mind up. The next one then, writing to advise. This is a little bit more, should we say, a little bit more passionate than writing to inform. Inform is just very neutral, whereas advice is like you've kind of got an opinion on it and you're trying to push them in the right direction. So the purpose of the writing is to use your own understanding to steer the reader in the right direction. And when we think about how we use this in everyday life, you get advice from friends, family members, very typically from parents and people in more senior positions within life. And a lot of the time when we give advice, the best way to receive it is to have a nice gentle tone when you're giving this as well. So the typical kind of things that we'd see right into advising would be things like an email to a friend, and that would be quite typical because again, that's where we're not being overly forceful, you're just giving advice, and friends are more likely to take your advice than someone who doesn't know you. The next one then is writing to persuade. So the purpose of this writing is to convince the audience towards a particular point of view. Now typically we're going to see this in things like a speech, a blog, and also it's going to be in things like writing to the council, if you're going to write a letter of complaint, for example, if you're asking for any kind of fund request as well, because that often comes up in some of the assessments as well. So there we have it, our three different types of writing that you're going to have to think about there. So writing to inform, to advise, and persuade. And the interesting thing about this one is that it kind of grows in the force or the strength of the argument as you go along, so from left to right. So writing to inform, again, is just stating things very matter-of-factly. Writing to advise is where you're trying to kind of gently steer them in the right direction. And writing to persuade can be a little bit more forceful. You're going to use some techniques, potentially like direct address, where you make them feel like they've been put on the spot, or also things like rhetorical questions as well, that really help draw the reader in. So within this lesson then, this is the kind of things that we're going to be focusing on. So first of all, we're going to recall the key features of an article. We're going to understand how to structure a writing response, and you're going to apply your understanding to attempt an exam style question. Now the question that we're looking at today is actually came from one of the sample assessments from City and Guilds. So if you're not doing it with that exam board, don't worry about it too much, because the questions are very similar, and certainly all of the techniques and the methods that you need to use are going to be the same as well. It is good to look at other exam boards as well, because that will help you to get an idea of some different questions that could come up in your own assessments. Before we think about the actual writing assessment that we're going to focus on, we're going to look at some of the things that are going to be considered some of the most common errors, and some of the things that can easily cause us to lose some marks within the assessment. So here are some of the top things that you should avoid doing within your writing response, okay? So the first one would be using the wrong homophone. Now if you're not too sure what we mean by this, then don't worry about it too much. What we're going to do is each week we're going to take a look at each one of these errors, and we're going to think about how we can actually understand it better and make sure that we don't include it in our writing. So within this lesson we will be going through homophones as well. The second one is we're going to make sure that we're writing in paragraphs. Now this might seem like quite an obvious thing that we all know or should know by now, that you should write in paragraphs. The only issue with that is that when you get a topic that you really care about, that you're really enthusiastic about, it's very easy to forget to paragraph and actually structure your writing appropriately. So it's really important that you think about that as well. Now if you're not too sure about this, please do check out our other videos that go into it in more detail. Specifically, we've got a video that actually goes through the acronym TIP-TOP, which actually tells you the different ways and times when you need to paragraph your writing. Okay, the next one, the third one. So not using the correct form or tone for the writing focus. Now every single year when people have a writing assessment, there will be a certain form of writing that they don't want to do. So you have things like a leaflet, a speech, a blog, a report, or any other number of ones that could come up. And there'll always be one that people don't really feel that confident about. The important thing is that if you are, for example, being told to write in a speech, you need to make sure that you're starting it the same way you'd write a speech. So those are key things to think about. So if you're not too sure about how to set out the different forms, then it's important to revise that as well. When we're thinking about the tone of the writing, we're thinking about the kind of language you're using and the kind of attitude you're actually putting down onto the page. You have to think very carefully about the audience, and certain audiences react different ways to different tones. For example, if you talk in a very childlike manner to a teenager, they're not going to be very responsive and might not really take on board what you have to say. The next one then. So spelling mistakes. Now a lot of people worry about spelling mistakes, and it's very understandable why that's something to worry about. However, a thing to pay attention to is that when we think about spelling mistakes, it's kind of acceptable, or at least understandable, if you misspell a really complicated word. That's something that's quite a common thing to do. However, if you are spelling what we consider to be quite low-level words and you're spelling them incorrectly, then that's going to cause you to lose more marks. So those will be things like our homophones, which we're going to look at in a minute, and the general words that should be everyday, basic words that we use in our day-to-day lives. The next one, grammar mistakes. Okay, grammar can be an extremely important area, especially if your English is a second language. it does not necessarily mean that there's going to be any correlation with a previous language you might have learned. So it's important that you're aware of the grammatical rules that we have in English as well. And then the final one, mismanaging of timing. So for example, if we think about the writing task that we're going to do today, within this actual exam paper, there's actually 2 questions to answer, and you get an hour to answer it. And the issue is, when you look at the actual questions, is that the 2 questions that are available are not actually worth the same amount of marks. So you'd need to do a little bit of maths and really think about managing your timing there, and make sure you spend the appropriate amount of time on each question in relation to how many marks each question is actually worth. Common mistakes. So what are homophones and why do we need to know them? So here are some common ones that you may have heard, and these are the typical things that we notice in functional skills writing assessments, and they're easily ones to get mixed up, so it's really important that we go over them. So the first homophone, one of the most common ones to look at, is to, and to. So a lot of native English speakers actually get this one wrong. So an easy way to think about it is, out of the 3, there's one of them that you're going to use more often than the others, and that would be the first one. So TO is the one that you use generally most of the time within speaking. The second one, TWO, is the one that we normally use when we're referring to an actual numerical value, so in terms of the number 2. And then the third one is the one that you normally use when you're talking about a quantity. So a typical example of this would be, I can't eat that meal, you've put far too much salt. So that 2 is going to be talking about the level of quantity of salt that's gone into the meal that's been made there. The next one is the there, and there. So very similar to the first example we just looked at. The first there is the one that we're using more often than the rest. The second one is going to be when you're referring to a possession. So they lost their car keys would be THEIR. And then the next one, it actually says they are, but we have an apostrophe there, which means we're missing out the letter A. The next one, we have your and your. Again, these are words that sound the same, but their meaning is actually quite different as well. So if you're not too sure about those, you need to make sure that you're going back over them and revising them. The next one, we have by, and by. So again, just like with to and there, the first one, B and Y, is the one that you're probably going to be using more commonly than the rest. The second one is when you make a purchase, so buying things in a shop. And the final one is when we're saying goodbye. So again, it's good to kind of make sure that you're aware of the different homophones and make sure that you're using them effectively. Next one we have stationary and stationary. So you have things like not moving, and then you also have stationary where we're talking about pens and paper and things like that. So we're just going to go through the next ones. If you're not too sure about what they mean, do take the time just to put them into a thesaurus and make sure you can add that to your understanding as we go through. So the next one's then, you've got complement and complement, break and break, course and course. So the more you get used to these, the more you can actually get your own understanding of them, then the easier it's going to be when you come to apply your understanding to an exam style situation. So if you do need to pause the video here and just spend a bit more time thinking about homophones, please feel free to do so. If you feel like we need a few more worked examples with this, then please do give us a comment below and we'll try and put something together if you feel like you need more help with it. But the more you get used to these homophones, the easier it's going to be to make sure that you're using the appropriate one when it comes to your writing assessment. Look at the assessment question and attempt the challenges that follow. So one of the big issues we have when we face the writing assessment is that it's actually quite an in-depth question. If we just look at the first bit then, we're going to try and get some idea of what they want us to write about. So it says then, it is well known that celebrities use the media to help their careers, but they don't seem to like it when the media covers their private lives. Is it right how the media treats celebrities? How do celebrities benefit from the media, and how does the media benefit from celebrities? Should anything be off limits, or can the media cover everything about celebrities and their private lives? So your task: write an article for a student magazine exploring the extent to which it is fair that the private lives of celebrities are covered in the media. And for this question, we're going to get 27 marks that are available. So this is really quite a long-winded question. So when you look at this, the first thing you need to think about is identifying the TAP. Now, if you've followed any of our other videos now, you'll probably be aware that when we say the TAP, we mean the topic, the audience, and the purpose. So that's really important there. You need to try to break it down. So the topic is actually going to cover quite a few different elements when we look at this question. So the first thing to identify would be the main thing it is about is celebrities. It's also about the media, and we have career, and then almost a bit of a contrast here with private lives. Okay, so you got quite a few different elements to play around with there. So that's the topic. Then the audience. Now it doesn't always directly state the age or even the gender of the person that you're writing to, so sometimes you need to think about it in a little bit more depth. And this doesn't really become obvious until you get to the actual writing task at the bottom. So it says write an article for a student magazine. Now it doesn't say very clearly how old these students are going to be, but if we use our kind of common sense, we know that a student is roughly going to be anywhere from 15 years old upwards, don't we? So we're kind of talking about teenagers. Then when it says purpose, it hasn't actually told us whether we need to inform, persuade or advise, but it says the extent to which it is fair. So this is telling us here to justify your own opinion. So it's entirely up to you. Okay, you'd have to think about this question in detail, and ideally you'd have to come up with at least 3 ideas to try and justify your argument that you're going to make. If it's worth 27 marks as well, you need to use some kind of logic or common sense to think about how many paragraphs are going to get you a reasonable mark as well. So, super challenge. Another thing to think about here is that you've been asked to write an article. So if you're not 100% sure about what we mean about an article, you need to make sure that you are familiar with how to lay it out. So we're talking about the kind of presentational features or organizational features that you'd normally associate or have to use when you write an article. And then the mega challenge. I want you to think now, if this was the actual exam and you were sat down with this question and you had to write an article on the topic that we've just gone through, how confident would you feel about writing this article? And what kind of things would you need to do in order to get a high mark? Use this to kind of gauge where you are at the moment and whether you need to spend more time to develop your ideas and your response further. Writing an article. So these are going to be the typical kind of features, organizational or presentational features that you need to use to get a decent mark. So first of all then, you would need to have a heading or a headline. Now, one common misconception that people have is that it has to be a real snappy, amazing, impressive headline, like a really nice play on words. That is not true whatsoever. As an examiner, all I'm interested in is, do you know how to use the typical organisational features or layout features so that you know what an article actually looks like. Have an introduction. Now you're going to have this generally with a lot of different forms of writing as well, but just briefly say the issue that it is that you're writing about, maybe discuss the fact that there's a lot of pros and cons for it before you go into the main body of your writing. The next one is a subheading. Now this is a fantastic thing to use, especially if you're someone who struggles with paragraph in your writing. A subheading is really going to help you to just break down your paragraphs and know what you need to focus on as you move on. Bullet points. Now this can be really helpful. Personally, I don't think it's something you have to use, but it's also good to just make it a little bit more manageable for the reader's eye. So when you look at an actual response and see how it's been broken down as well. Look at the 2 examples below and attempt the questions that follow. So now what we're going to do, we're going to actually see 2 realistic examples that someone has wrote about the same topic that you've thought about as well. So if you are someone who struggles to come up with some of the ideas, you're more than welcome to use some of these when it comes to writing your own response. So if we look at text A, first of all then, we're going to think about what they're actually trying to say about that same topic. So it says then, Celebrities these days are just awful. They post a never-ending barrage of images on social media, so it's their own fault if they get a negative comment or two. Firstly, let's not forget that they make a load of money. Their cars, homes and vacations are worth the backlash they might receive from some negative comments online. Some of them need to just grow up and get a grip. I mean seriously, if you're a celebrity, you have to just take the good with the bad. Okay, so think about the kind of tone that's been used within text A. Have a look at any of the techniques or any of the kind of keywords that they've used to try and get their message across. And we're now going to have a look at text B, and once we've done that, we're going to have a go at just 6 quick-fire questions to practice our reading skills as well. So text B then. Modern day celebrities find themselves in the unique position. Never before have people had to deal with so much scrutiny, judgment and ridicule than celebrities do these days. Yes, they're living their best lives financially, but is it really worth the cost? Firstly, if we look at the data, 80% of celebrities have had issues with social media affecting their mental health. How are they expected to go about their lives when they're constantly worrying about what's getting posted online? So if you want to pause the video here and spend a bit more time going through the information, please feel free to do so. What we're going to do now is we're going to jump across and we're going to think about answering some of those questions to demonstrate our understanding. Quickfire questions. Answer the questions based on 2 examples we've just read. Question 1. Look at the following adjectives. Which one best describes the tone of text A? So the key words that we've got there is joyful, concerned and aggressive. Now this is a very typical question that you get for the reading assessment as well. Even if you've completed this part of it, it's still really good to practice because you might be thinking about going on to level 2 or even GCSE, so it's all going to help towards that as well. Question number 2. Identify a quotation that best illustrates the tone of text A. So for example, if you were to say that the tone that was used in text A is joyful, you'd have to find an element within that text and actually repeat it word for word within quotation marks as well to demonstrate your understanding for this question. Number 3. Look at text A. Where has the writer used the wrong homophone? Now if you think about what we've covered previously in that video, a homophone is a word that sounds exactly the same as another word but has a different meaning. Number 4. Look at text B. In the line, celebrities find themselves in a unique position. Replace the word unique with another suitable adjective. So again, this is a very typical word to use. If you really are struggling with it, it's worthwhile just to type in the word unique into a thesaurus and just to get a little bit more of a knowledge and understanding of how we could use that word. Another way to test this out when you're doing this question is try to read through the actual sentence with the other word that you think might go there and just use that kind of sound test to see if it sounds right or makes sense in your head, because that's a real good way just to test to see if the word works in that sentence. Number 5. Identify the deforest technique that has been used in both texts. If you're not too sure what we mean when we talk about deforest techniques, this is the acronym that you need to use or need to be aware of when you're talking about some of the key language techniques that's used in both functional skills and also in GCSE as well. Number 6, the final one. Look at both responses and I want you to think about which response is better. Once you've actually made up your mind about that as well, I'd like you to try to justify your answer. So if you think that text A is better, for example, try and think why. What actually makes it more successful than the other text? If you'd like to pause the video here and take your time and go through these questions, please do so now. We're now going to jump ahead and go through some of the answers in the next part of the video. Class feedback. Check your answers against the ones below. So question 1, we're thinking about the best adjectives to describe text A, and the correct one would be aggressive. Number 2, if we're thinking about identifying a quotation that both illustrates it, there's a number of different answers that you could put that would still get you a mark. And the one that I've went with here is some of them need to just grow up and get a grip. Now, if you weren't too sure about which one conveys the best tone, in terms of giving us quite an aggressive nature there, think about how would it seem if someone was actually saying this to someone face to face, and definitely telling someone to grow up and get a grip would be conceived as being quite aggressive. Number 3, look at text A. Where's the writer used the wrong homophone? So the main one that we could think about there is that the writer has used the wrong there. So they wrote there as in THERE, and they should have wrote it with the possessive word instead, which is THEIR instead. Okay, number 4, look at text B. In the line celebrities find themselves in a unique position, replace the word unique with another suitable adjective. So answers may include but are not limited to words like new, exclusive and one-off. Now if you've got anything else that's similar to that, then that's absolutely fine. Again, it's just important to see if you can do that little test by reading it out loud and seeing if it fits in and sounds right in your sentence. Next one then, number 5. So we're thinking about which one would use the same DeForest technique. So both texts have used a triplet or a group of 3 in their response. Now you could have identified a number of different techniques as well, as long as both of them have it in there. So you might have things like facts and opinions, for example, which was also in there. The main one I was thinking of though would be a triplet or a group of 3. So with that one then, we'd get things like their cars, homes and vacations are worth the backlash they might receive. So it's 3 things towards a common goal. Or text B, so much scrutiny, judgment and ridicule, which is really quite a good and effective group of 3 there, because it does make us feel quite bad about the things that they're going through. Now number 6, this is the one that's a difficult one. So which response is better? Try and justify your answer. Now really there's no right or wrong answer with this one. Both of them have some positives and both of them have some negatives. So what we'd be looking for within this response is to make sure that you make one of these points, you make one of these comments about each of them. So text A's tone is far too aggressive. You've got to think about how you're actually going to be perceived by the writing that you're coming up with. So by telling someone they need to grow up and get a grip, a lot of the time you're not going to be able to get your message through to them because you're just coming off as just too aggressive or even potentially violent. Another point you could make is that text A has used the wrong homophone, so they've used the wrong there instead of the other there. Text B hasn't used any paragraphs in the response. Now, as we spoke about earlier on in the video, that's one of the key areas to look out for. The next thing would be neither response has used the presentational features for an article, so none of them had headlines and subheadings. So these are going to be kind of things that are like red flags for an examiner. If you're told to lay the writing out as an article, it must very much represent what an article should look like. So now if we look back at the writing question, we're going to use the kind of information that we've looked through from text A and text B, their thoughts and ideas about the topic, and you can use it to start planning your response to this question. So just to recap then, this is what the question's based about. So it's well known that celebrities use the media to help their careers, but they don't seem to like it when the media covers their private lives. These bullet points are going to be used to help you come up with those ideas and actually help you to steer the argument or the conversation in the right direction. So is it right how the media treats celebrities? That's one thing. How do celebrities benefit from the media, and how does the media benefit from celebrities? Should anything be off limits, or can the media cover everything about celebrities and their private lives? Now, you don't need to be someone who's really immersed in the life of celebrities. You can kind of use a little bit of your common sense. So for example, you might not be aware of how the media treats celebrities, but you might be aware that there are some benefits of being seen in social media, or having your picture taken, or being on the front cover of this magazine or that magazine. And then when it comes to things being off limits, think about relationships. Now, everything with relationships is out there for the public eye, so think about how those kind of things are actually perceived by people as well. So here's our task as well then. So write an article for a student magazine exploring the extent to which it is fair that the private lives of celebrities are covered in the media. Again, if you do need to use any of the information that we covered in text A and text B, please do so. It's always worth having a look at those kind of things and see if you can use any of those ideas to help formulate your own response. Now, if you are struggling to start, then there's a key thing for you to watch if you're not too sure about what's been going on with celebrities and their treatment within the media, and we're going to talk about that in the next part. Now, if you do need a few more ideas, then it might be worthwhile to check out the video. That you can see the link is there. I'll also include it as well in the description within this video as well. Okay, so if you haven't seen this video, what it is about celebrity Will Smith, who got into an altercation at the Oscars. Now, good things to consider when you watch this is, are celebrities judged more than regular people because they're in the public eye? Should the conflict be kept private? And how would it feel to have everyone know about your personal relationship? If you're not too sure about the kind of things that are going on within the media and things like that, it is very much worthwhile to check out things like Good Morning Britain. They do have a lot of debates about some of the current things that are happening within society. We never really know what's going to come up in your assessment in terms of the actual question, but you can actually gain a good understanding of current events, which is always going to be important because you never know what's going to come up in your assessment. If you need any extra help or additional support, the new videos will be added every single week. If you still can't find anything on our channel, please do check out our partner channel, Bookworm Teaching, for more lessons and guidance on all things English. If you haven't done so already, guys, as well, could you please like and subscribe? It really does help us out as you do so. Thanks ever so much, guys, and best of luck with all your work and revision in the future. Bye bye.